Have you ever been betrayed by the one person you trusted most? So publicly, so cruelly, that it left you frozen? Imagine walking into a room full of strangers and seeing your husband laughing, smiling, with another woman clinging to him like she belongs there. But here's the twist. You're 6 months pregnant, and you didn't come to cry. You came to end the show. This isn't just drama. It's real, raw, and it changes everything. Trust me, once you hear what she did next, you won't be able to look away. Ready? Let me tell you what really happened that night. The chandelier sparkled above as the guests raised their glasses in a toast, laughter echoing through the grand ballroom of the Westmore Gala. It was the social event of the season, where New York's elite paraded their status like designer labels. At the center of it all stood Adrian Blake, the tech billionaire whose name alone could freeze a room. Tall, composed, immaculately tailored in Tom Ford, he held court among CEOs and celebrities. And at his side, a woman who was not his wife. Bianca Rousseau, a former model turned socialite, clung to his arm with a smirk as sharp as the slit in her sequined gown. She leaned in, whispering something that made Adrian chuckle, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The crowd didn't hide their curiosity. It was no secret that Adrian's wife hadn't been seen in public for months. But then, the room shifted. The doors to the ballroom creaked open, not slammed, not thrown, but slowly, deliberately. Every eye turned. Standing there in the golden light spilling from the hallway was her, Isabel. 6 months pregnant. Alone. Dressed in a simple but elegant ivory gown that hugged her curves, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Her hair was swept up, face glowing, not with makeup but with a calm, terrifying resolve. Whispers shot through the crowd like wildfire. Is that his wife? Isn't she pregnant? Oh my God, she's here. Adrian's smirk evaporated. Bianca stiffened beside him, faltering for the first time that night. But Isabel didn't falter. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked in slowly, like she belonged there. Because she did. She didn't look at Adrian. She didn't acknowledge Bianca. She walked straight to the front where the gala was about to begin and handed a white envelope to the event organizer. The man read it. His eyes widened. He looked at her, then at Adrian, then back at the envelope. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, tapping the microphone, "before we begin tonight's program, we have a very unexpected update." The crowd leaned in. Isabel turned to face them all. "Since everyone's already here," she said, voice steady, "this seems like a perfect time for some truth." She reached into her clutch, pulled out a tiny USB stick, and handed it to the AV team. Within seconds, the giant screen behind the stage lit up, not with the gala's promotional video but with hidden camera footage of Adrian, in hotel rooms, with Bianca, with others, laughing, mocking Isabel, saying she's just a housewife, pregnant or not, she's boring as hell. Gasps filled the air. Bianca turned ghost white. Adrian tried to step forward, but Isabel raised her hand calmly. "Don't," she said coldly. Security blocked his path. "Tonight was supposed to be your big moment," she continued, "so I figured I'd let you have it. Lights, camera, action." Then she turned her back on him, on all of them, and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a room full of people stunned into silence, and one very powerful man, completely undone. Because what no one knew, not yet, was that Isabel wasn't just a wife, not just a woman scorned. She had just received an offer that would change everything. And Adrian Blake had just made the worst mistake of his life. Isabel Monroe was never the woman people noticed first. She wasn't loud, didn't demand attention, and never tried to outshine anyone in a room. She preferred being the one behind the camera, not in front of it. At 31, she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who had been through storms and learned how to stand even when everything inside her was shaking. Her eyes, a soft hazel that sometimes turned to steel, held more stories than she ever told out loud. Before she became Mrs. Isabel Blake, the wife of tech magnate Adrian Blake, she was just Isabel. A literature graduate who taught creative writing to high school seniors in Brooklyn. She loved words, loved the way they could be both weapons and bandages. Her world was small, simple, grounded in routine and meaningful moments. Coffee in the mornings, poetry readings on Fridays, and long phone calls with her sister, Margot, who lived across the country. She wasn't chasing fame. She didn't need to be seen to feel validated. She had a quiet joy about her. A calm. And that was what drew Adrian to her in the first place. They met at a bookstore, not a glamorous party or some high-profile charity event, but at a small, independent bookstore where Isabel was browsing through the classics section, flipping through a worn copy of Jane Eyre. Adrian, in dark jeans and a ball cap that barely hid his identity, had just ducked in to avoid the paparazzi waiting outside a nearby restaurant. Their eyes met when they reached for the same book, The Great Gatsby. It was so cliché, they both laughed. He asked if she was a writer. She said no, just someone who liked reading about broken people who still found a way to keep going. That answer stayed with him. What began as coffee turned into late-night conversations, walks in the park, weekend getaways to upstate New York. For once, Adrian didn't feel like a billionaire being chased. With Isabel, he felt human. And Isabel? She fell for the man behind the empire. The man who quoted Neruda and talked about building schools in underfunded neighborhoods. He listened, he made her laugh, he made her believe in forever. When Adrian proposed, it was quiet. Just the two of them, on the balcony of their favorite hotel overlooking the Hudson River. He didn't kneel, he just held her hand, looked her in the eyes and said, "I want my life to start and end with you." It was everything she had ever dreamed. Their wedding was intimate, not the circus the media expected. Only close family and friends. She wore her mother's vintage dress and carried daisies, her favorite flower. Adrian promised the world, but Isabel never wanted it. She just wanted him. In the beginning, they were happy. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They had picnics in Central Park, binge-watched documentaries on obscure topics, and danced in their kitchen on Tuesday nights. Adrian traveled, yes, but he always came back. He brought her little gifts from every city he visited. A bookmark from Tokyo, a scarf from Milan, a postcard from Iceland with a note, "Even here, I'm thinking of you." And when Isabel found out she was pregnant, Adrian cried. He lifted her in his arms, twirled her around their penthouse, and promised that their baby would grow up knowing what true love looked like. He called it their second chapter. But chapters change. The first sign was subtle. Missed dinners, calls that went unanswered, smiles that didn't reach his eyes. Adrian stopped asking about her day. He came home smelling of cologne that wasn't his, carrying stress he refused to name. Isabel felt the shift like a draft in a closed room. Cold, unspoken. She told herself it was the pressure of expansion, the demands of running a billion-dollar company. She wanted to believe that he was just overwhelmed. She wanted to believe in the man who read her poetry in bed. But truth has a way of rising, no matter how deeply you bury it. Isabel began noticing things. Receipts from places she hadn't been, lipstick stains on cufflinks that weren't hers. And then, one evening, when she picked up his suit jacket from the cleaners, she found a note in the pocket. No name, just a lipstick kiss and the words, "Last night was perfect, same time next week." Her heart didn't break. It cracked, quietly, like the slow splitting of ice. She didn't confront him right away. Isabel had never been the woman who exploded. She needed to know the full truth. So she watched, waited, listened, and every day she grew quieter. But inside, something was shifting. She wasn't just a woman being cheated on. She was a mother, a protector. And her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. She started documenting everything. She reached out to a lawyer, opened a separate bank account, had conversations with people Adrian didn't know she knew. People who had been watching him from the inside, former assistants, disgruntled employees. They told her stories, gave her files. The man who once said he couldn't breathe without her? He was trying to erase her before their child even came into the world. But Isabel had a secret of her own. She wasn't just the literature teacher from Brooklyn. She was the sole beneficiary of the Monroe Trust, a fortune passed down from her grandfather's pharmaceutical empire. She had chosen a quiet life, chosen to work and live without fanfare. Adrian never cared about her finances, never asked. He assumed she was ordinary, and she let him think that. Until now. She was done hiding, done playing small. Because Adrian wasn't going to discard her like a worn-out accessory, and he wasn't going to humiliate her without consequence. The woman he thought he broke? She was just getting started. The Westmore Grand Hotel was more than a landmark. It was a monument to power, wealth, and legacy. Located at the corner of Fifth Avenue and East 57th Street, it had hosted presidents, royalty, and icons for over a century. Its ballroom, a marvel of old-world luxury, was lined with gold leaf molding and massive crystal chandeliers that dripped from the ceiling like frozen rain. Every inch of the space exuded affluence, from the velvet drapes to the Italian marble floors polished so thoroughly they reflected the guests like mirrors. Tonight, it wasn't just any event. It was the annual Blake Future Tech Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of New York's social calendar. $1,000-a-plate spectacle, the gala was known for its pageantry and the dazzling display of who's who in tech, politics, media, and fashion. Invitations were rarer than stock options at IPO. Only the elite attended. And tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Isabel was supposed to be absent. She hadn't been seen in public since announcing her pregnancy, which had only fueled the rumors. Some said she was sick. Others whispered she had been quietly cast aside for a younger woman. Gossip columnists speculated wildly, but none knew the truth. The truth was that she had been watching, waiting, calculating. The ballroom shimmered with light. Long banquet tables were covered with custom linens embroidered with the Blake Foundation logo in gold thread. Towering floral arrangements in blush and cream hues crowned each table, surrounded by name cards handwritten in calligraphy. The air carried the scent of roses, champagne, and something faintly artificial: ambition. A 20-piece orchestra played a slow jazz arrangement, the perfect backdrop to the clink of crystal flutes and murmured conversations about venture capital, global expansion, and political donations. Waiters in black bow ties floated between groups with trays of hors d'oeuvres crafted by a Michelin-starred chef flown in from Paris. At the center of it all was Adrian Blake, dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, a watch worth more than a Manhattan condo glinting on his wrist. He looked every bit the king of his empire, confident, charismatic, charming to the point of intoxication. Beside him, Bianca Rousseau dazzled in a scarlet gown cut to command attention. Her hair was a cascade of soft curls, her lipstick the same shade as the wine she sipped delicately while scanning the room for cameras. Bianca wasn't a fool. She had worked hard for this moment. Climbing through the ranks of society required more than beauty. It required timing, precision, and a willingness to step on necks with a smile. And tonight, she believed she had won. She was on Adrian's arm, in his world, being introduced to his allies and investors, his inner circle. She was no longer the secret, or so she thought. On the far end of the ballroom was a massive stage with a grand staircase, flanked by twin video walls playing a curated montage of Blake Future Tech's charitable efforts, robotics programs in underserved schools, solar energy grants in developing countries, and scholarships for STEM students. It was all very noble, very polished, and very strategic. Adrian was set to speak at 8:30 p.m. Every light in the room had been designed to highlight him at that exact moment. A digital cue from the lighting director would bring the room to a subtle dim, focusing all attention on the podium at center stage. Bianca imagined herself standing beside him, smiling, perhaps even holding his hand as he declared a new initiative. But then the lights shifted early. Not gradually, not as planned, but abruptly. The dimming was sharper, almost unsettling. Then the ballroom doors opened. All heads turned. Isabel stepped inside like a vision that didn't belong to their world. Not anymore. The spotlight meant for Adrian moved instinctively toward her. Not because someone directed it, but because even the lights, it seemed, knew this night no longer belonged to him. The effect was immediate. Gasps, murmurs. Chairs scraped the floor as guests turned to get a better view. Phones slid discreetly from clutches. The air changed. The temperature dropped. And Adrian's face turned from pride to panic in the space of 3 seconds. Isabel didn't walk like a woman who had been humiliated. She walked like she owned the building. Her dress, a soft ivory gown with a flowing cape that trailed behind her like smoke, was custom designed and hand-stitched by a Parisian atelier known only to the ultra-wealthy. Her hair was swept into an elegant bun. Her earrings, vintage Cartier. Every inch of her screamed elegance, strength, and rebirth. She moved slowly, deliberately, every step echoing on the marble like a countdown. Her belly was visible, yes, but it didn't make her look weak. It made her look powerful, unbreakable. She stopped in front of the stage and handed a sealed envelope to the event coordinator. Then, without a word, she turned to face the crowd. No trembling, no tears, just a gaze so calm it was terrifying. Bianca's grip on her champagne glass tightened. Adrian moved to step forward, but Isabel raised a hand slightly, just enough to stop him. Not tonight. The screen behind her flickered. The montage of philanthropy vanished, replaced by footage. Raw. Unedited. Private. The room fell into stunned silence. The Blake Foundation Gala, an event built to celebrate success, had just become ground zero for the destruction of a public image. And Isabel? She wasn't here to cry. She was here to reclaim everything. Adrian Blake wasn't always the villain in Isabel's story. There was a time when he was her entire world, the man who whispered dreams into her ear, who painted their future like a mural of hope and passion. But time, power, and ego had revealed something darker beneath his charismatic exterior. And tonight, with the world watching, the mask had finally slipped. To the public, Adrian was a genius, a billionaire tech entrepreneur who built one of the most influential AI platforms in the world. Investors called him a visionary. Magazines labeled him the kingmaker of Silicon Alley. He was polished, articulate, and walked with the confidence of someone who knew everyone wanted a piece of him. But behind closed doors, Adrian was a man who had grown addicted to being worshipped. He didn't cheat because he lacked love. He cheated because he craved control. Isabel hadn't seen it at first. In the early years of their marriage, he had been attentive, generous, thoughtful. But as his company expanded, as the headlines multiplied and the money flooded in, Adrian began to see their marriage as a detail in his story, not the foundation. He no longer introduced Isabel as his wife at corporate events. She became Izzy in passing mentions, a footnote. When she got pregnant, he smiled for the cameras, posed with his hand on her belly, but at home, he was always too busy. And then came Bianca. Bianca Rousseau was everything Adrian thought he deserved, a mirror to his ego. Stunning, seductive, strategically ambitious. A woman who didn't just play the game, she rewrote the rules. A former model with a reputation for reinvention, she had graced runways unedited and long before pivoting into PR, then into the arms of powerful men with fragile loyalty. Bianca had first entered Adrian's orbit at a tech summit in Miami. She was managing media relations for one of his rival firms. She made a bold move, interrupting his conversation with a snide comment about his company's latest product. Most women flirted. Bianca challenged. Adrian was intrigued. Their affair began innocently, an after-hours drink at the hotel bar, a shared ride to the airport. But Bianca knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't ask him about work. She asked him how it felt to carry the weight of so much influence. She called him a genius. She said Isabel didn't seem like someone who could handle a man like him. Adrian resisted, at first, but admiration was his drug, and Bianca served it in lethal doses. Within months, their relationship shifted from occasional flings to a full-blown affair. Adrian bought her a penthouse in Tribeca, a Porsche she never drove, and an unlimited credit card for discretionary spending. She used it for couture dresses, spa weekends, and designer jewelry, paid for by the same company Isabel had quietly helped him build, and Adrian had convinced himself it was harmless. Isabel was pregnant. She was always tired, he always tired, emotional, distracted. He told himself she wouldn't understand the pressures he faced. Bianca, on the other hand, made him feel alive, powerful, wanted. He didn't just cheat in secret, he started building a future without Isabel. He removed her name from certain business trusts, assigned lawyers to explore asset protection strategies in the event of divorce, quietly approached PR firms about reputation transition planning. The plan was clear. Publicly, he would remain the loving husband until after the baby was born. Then he would craft a narrative of separation due to irreconcilable differences. Bianca would remain in the background until she wasn't. But Adrian didn't know Isabel had already begun putting the pieces together. He didn't know about the tracker she placed on his car, or the voice recorder in the apartment, or the private investigator she'd quietly hired who now had folders, hundreds of pages of damning evidence. He didn't know that Isabel had spent the last 3 months preparing her exit and his public downfall. And tonight, standing in front of the crowd that once praised him, his legacy hung in the balance. Bianca, for all her poise, wasn't built for exposure. She was used to maneuvering from the shadows, used to being the secret. Watching Isabel command the room sent her into panic. This wasn't part of the plan. Adrian had promised her that Isabel would stay hidden, that she was weak, emotional, a woman who didn't fight. Bianca had smirked when she first saw Isabel walk in, visibly pregnant, head high. But as the footage played across the screens, clips of Adrian laughing in bed, mocking his wife, bragging about how he kept her in the dark while building his real life, Bianca's expression changed. Her smile vanished. The room began to shift. Investors glanced at one another. Politicians who had shaken Adrian's hand mere moments earlier stepped back. Sponsors whispered to aides. A few guests left their seats altogether. Adrian's world was cracking. He tried to speak, to move toward the microphone, but the event coordinator, who had just received a legal injunction from Isabel's attorney, shook his head. "You're not allowed on stage," he said. "Per court order, this space is now protected." Bianca turned to Adrian, eyes wide. "What is going on?" she hissed. Adrian didn't answer, because for the first time in a long time, he didn't have one. The predator had become the spectacle, and the woman he thought was breakable, she was now holding the leash. The room buzzed with disbelief as the final seconds of the footage faded from the massive screen behind Isabel. The gasps, the murmurs, the flashes of phones capturing it all. Every second was a dagger slicing through Adrian Blake's carefully curated empire. But the real destruction hadn't even begun. As the lights came back up, Adrian took a single step forward, his jaw tight, sweat forming along his temple. This is manipulation," he stammered, trying to find footing. "It's taken out of context." But Isabel turned toward him with a calm so chilling, it silenced the room faster than any shout could have. "Then explain it," she said, her voice clear, steady, amplified by the microphone the coordinator handed her. "Go ahead, Adrian. Tell them all why you called me dead weight. Tell them why you laughed about me being too tired to notice you sneaking out every other night." He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence was its own confession. Bianca stepped slightly behind him, suddenly very aware of how exposed she looked. Her red dress, once a symbol of dominance, now felt like a scarlet letter. The whispers about her weren't kind anymore. "She's the other woman," someone hissed. She knew. "That's the mistress? How shameless can you be?" Isabel wasn't done. She held up her phone, reading aloud from one of the emails Adrian had sent Bianca just 2 weeks prior. "Once the baby is born, I'll handle the divorce quietly. She's emotional, but not stupid. She'll settle if we offer enough." Isabel paused. "Was that the plan, Adrian? Offer me a check and hope I'd disappear?" He clenched his jaw, red creeping into his cheeks. "I stood by you for 7 years, she continued, emotion rising now. Not anger, but a controlled heartbreak that twisted in her throat. "I was there when you couldn't afford the rent on your first office. I was there before the boardrooms, before the jets, before any of them knew your name. And you threw me away like I was a liability." The room shifted. Empathy now poured in her direction. Faces once filled with gossip now looked at her with quiet awe. The quiet wife, the invisible woman. She had become the most powerful person in the room, and then it happened. Bianca, unable to bear the shift in attention, sneered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "You should thank me, actually. I gave him a reason to finally wake up." The words hung in the air like acid. Isabel turned slowly. "Thank you?" she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. "You think I should thank you?" She stepped down from the small stage and walked toward Bianca, not with rage, but with the kind of poised fury that only a betrayed woman could wield. "You're not the first woman to sleep with a married man, Bianca. And sadly, you won't be the last. But what makes you pathetic is that you thought being chosen made you powerful. You're not power. You're an accessory, a temporary distraction, a story he'll rewrite the second he finds a younger version of you." Bianca's smirk faltered. Adrian reached for Isabel's arm. "That's enough," he muttered, his voice low, pleading. "Please, let's talk." She yanked her arm away. "Oh, we'll talk," she said, nodding toward the double doors behind the ballroom. "In court." That's when she pulled out the final blow. From her clutch, she produced an envelope and handed it to him in front of everyone. "These are the divorce papers," she announced. "Signed, served, effective immediately." Audible gasps filled the room. Adrian looked at the envelope as if it were ticking. Then he saw the gold crest on the corner. The Monroe Family Trust. His eyes widened. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dropping. "Where did you— What?" "You never bothered to ask who I was before you met me," she said, taking a step back. "I didn't want your world, Adrian. I never needed your money. But now, I'm going to take back everything I helped you build. And trust me, my legal team makes yours look like interns." He tried to speak, but she was already turning away. Security stepped between them, on her order. As she walked toward the exit, applause began to ripple through the crowd. At first hesitant, but then swelling, stronger, louder, until even those who had once kissed Adrian's ring were now clapping for the woman he tried to erase. Bianca, red-faced and furious, turned to Adrian. "You told me she was weak," she hissed. "You said she wouldn't fight." Adrian said nothing, because now he understood. The woman he betrayed wasn't weak, she had been holding back. Outside the ballroom, under the canopy of the hotel's grand entrance, Isabel stepped into a waiting black SUV. The door was opened by a sharply dressed man, her new attorney. One of the most ruthless in the city. "You did well," he said simply. She nodded, breathing deeply for the first time that evening. Inside her, the baby kicked gently. Like it, too, knew they had won something tonight. Isabel looked out the tinted window as the car pulled away. The Westmore was now just a building in the rearview mirror. A place where she had been humiliated, and where she had taken her first step toward becoming something else entirely. She wasn't just reclaiming her dignity, she was about to rewrite the entire story. The SUV glided through the city's night like a ghost, but inside, Isabel felt everything. Her heart wasn't pounding, it was numb. Her hands lay flat on her lap, fingers intertwined loosely, as if even her body didn't know how to hold on anymore. The applause, the lights, the gasps, all of it was fading now, retreating behind the fog that had settled in her mind the moment she walked away from that ballroom. Her attorney said something. She didn't hear it, she just nodded. The driver pulled into the underground garage of a luxury apartment building on Central Park West. Isabel had moved out of the Blake penthouse 2 weeks earlier, quietly, strategically, into a furnished condo her family trust had leased under a private LLC. It was modern, sleek, and painfully empty. She stepped inside. The moment the door shut behind her, silence roared. She took off her heels slowly. Her feet ached. Her back pulsed with the dull throb of pregnancy. But her face remained still, composed, too still. The dress she wore, the custom couture that had turned heads just hours ago, now felt suffocating. She unzipped it, letting it fall to the floor, then stood there in her undergarments, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. The city lights sparkled outside, so alive, so unaware. She looked like a stranger, a woman who had just burned her marriage to the ground, a woman carrying a child into a future with no map. And finally, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slow, aching leak from the corners of her eyes, tracing down her cheeks, pooling at her collarbone. She didn't sob, she wept silently, as if mourning something sacred that had died, the love, the loyalty, the dream. She sank to the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. Her whole body trembled. Not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of it all. The betrayal, the performance, the consequences. She had planned every move for months, but now that it was done, now that the world had seen the truth, there was nothing left to plan. Only grief. Hours passed. Maybe 1, maybe 3. She lay in bed, curled on her side, hands cradling her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry. Sorry for choosing the wrong man. Sorry for not leaving sooner. Sorry for letting herself believe that love alone could be enough." She remembered the early days with Adrian. Sunday morning pancakes, his silly voices when reading to her. The way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. She clung to those memories like life buoys, then hated herself for it, because that man was gone. Or maybe he had never existed at all. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. Isabel didn't move. Her phone buzzed with missed calls, messages, headlines. Her sister Margot had called 3 times. There were texts from her lawyer, from news outlets, from strangers. She didn't open a single one. She lay there still, numb, until the nausea came. She rushed to the bathroom, retching into the sink, tears in her eyes. The pregnancy had been manageable up until now, but stress, pure, bone-deep stress, was rewriting every cell in her body. When she emerged, her reflection in the mirror startled her. Her skin was pale, her eyes puffy, her hair a tangled mess. The woman staring back was not the one who had silenced a ballroom the night before. She was exhausted, hollow. She sat on the edge of the tub, legs shaking, and wondered what came next. No more Adrian, no more pretending, no more safety net. She was about to become a single mother, publicly, infamously, and she had no idea how to begin. Later that afternoon, Margot arrived unannounced. She didn't knock. She used the code Isabel had given her months ago, back when she first suspected things were going wrong. She found her sister still in bed, lights off, phone face down on the nightstand. Margot didn't say anything at first. She just sat beside her and placed a hand on Isabel's back. Isabel didn't move. After a few minutes, she whispered, "You were right." Margot exhaled. "I didn't want to be." Silence. Then softly, "It hurts so much." "I know. It's like, I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're someone who survived." Isabel shook her head. "It doesn't feel like it." Margot looked around the room. The chaos, the darkness, the grief, and she knew Isabel needed time. But also she needed to be reminded. "Do you remember when we were kids?" she said gently. "When Dad left, you were 9. You held my hand and told me we were going to be okay. You planned how we'd take care of Mom. You were always the strong one. I don't feel strong. You don't have to be right now, but you will be again." Isabel didn't reply. She just stared at the ceiling, wondering how she was supposed to rebuild a life from ashes. That night, she finally opened her phone. There were hundreds of notifications. Her name was trending. Headlines varied from sensational to sympathetic. She clicked one article. Pregnant wife confronts tech billionaire at gala, files for divorce mid-event. Another one. Isabel Monroe, from silent partner to power player. There were think pieces, commentaries, praise, criticism. But what caught her eye most were the messages from other women, strangers. Some wrote, "You gave me courage." Others shared stories of betrayal, heartbreak, survival. One message simply read, "Thank you for not staying silent." She stared at that message for a long time. Then something shifted. It was small, barely perceptible, but real. A flicker, a spark. She sat up, slowly, wiped her face, and for the first time in 2 days she opened the curtains. Light poured in. She wasn't healed. Not even close. But she wasn't done either. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain, the exhaustion, the heartbreak, she felt the beginning of something else. Resolve. The rain began softly that morning. Not in torrents, not dramatic, just steady, rhythmic droplets against the windows of Isabel's condo. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, one hand cradling her belly, the other wrapped around a warm mug of tea. She hadn't turned on the news. She didn't need to. She already knew her face was everywhere. The woman who exposed her billionaire husband at a gala, the betrayed wife, the symbol of defiance. But there was one thing the world still didn't know, the part she'd kept hidden. For years. Until now. It started with a phone call, the kind that made her heart skip, not in fear, but in readiness. She knew the number well, knew the voice that answered on the second ring. "Miss Monroe," the woman said, crisp and professional. "Everything is in place." Isabel took a slow breath. "Release it." In a skyscraper just 7 blocks away, a PR firm fired off the first wave of stories. It wasn't a leak. It was a revelation. The headlines hit like an earthquake. Isabel Monroe, heiress to multi-billion-dollar empire, breaks her silence. The woman behind the mask, Adrian Blake's ex-wife, is more powerful than he ever knew. The Monroe legacy. Isabel returns to claim her place in global business. The article detailed what no one in Adrian's world had ever bothered to ask. Where Isabel came from, who she really was, and why her silence had been the greatest miscalculation of his career. Born Isabel Rowan Monroe, she was the only daughter of Harrison Monroe, the reclusive media tycoon who had built one of the most influential legacy conglomerates in America. A man whose name rarely appeared in headlines, but whose money moved presidents. Her childhood had been one of privilege cloaked in privacy, boarding schools, summer homes, bodyguards, etiquette lessons. But she had never wanted that life. She had begged her father at 17 to let her live simply, to study literature, to teach, to be normal. He agreed, on one condition: if she left, she had to leave it all. No inheritance, no titles, just her name, and she had. For over a decade, Isabel lived without using a cent of her family fortune. She built her life on her own terms, taught, loved, married a man who never asked where she came from. And when she met Adrian, she had kept it that way. Not out of shame, but because she wanted to be chosen for who she was, not what she came from. But now the rules had changed. Adrian Blake, the man who mocked her for being just a teacher, was about to discover he had married into more power than he could ever dream of possessing. And worse, he had tried to crush the one person who could destroy him with a single press release. As the news spread, the ripple effect began almost immediately. Board members at Blake Future Tech scheduled emergency meetings. Shareholders demanded clarity. Securities analysts revised forecasts. The man who had prided himself on being self-made now faced the wrath of a name bigger, older, and more respected than his own. And at the center of it all stood Isabel. Calm, calculating, ready. That afternoon, she met with the Monroe Trust's legal team at a private club in Manhattan. The room, paneled in mahogany and flooded with afternoon light, was filled with attorneys, financial advisors, and a man in a tailored navy suit whose presence silenced even the most seasoned executives. His name was William Langston. He had been her father's top strategist for over 2 decades. "Are you sure?" he asked, glancing at the papers before him. Isabel nodded. "I want to re-enter the board." "You're reclaiming your seat on Monroe Global?" "I am." He studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Your father would be proud." "I'm not doing it for him," she replied. "I'm doing it for me and for this child." She rested her hand on her belly. Langston nodded once, then "Let's begin." The following days were a whirlwind. Reporters camped outside her building. Former colleagues reached out with apologies. Offers flooded in, interviews, brand partnerships, collaborations. She declined most. She wasn't interested in fame. She wanted power. Quiet, strategic power. Adrian called. Once, she let it ring, then sent it straight to voicemail. He called again and again. Finally, a text. "We need to talk. Please." "I didn't know." She blocked the number. He didn't deserve to know anymore. By the end of the week, Isabel had quietly purchased a controlling share in one of Blake Future Tech's major vendors. She had hired 2 former executives from Adrian's own company. She wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was positioning herself to walk into his world and reshape it entirely. But the twist that stunned everyone wasn't just her wealth. It was her timing. Because 2 days later, at a Women in Business summit held at the Conrad Hotel, Isabel made a surprise appearance. She stepped onto the stage in a tailored white pantsuit, hair swept back, posture regal. The audience rose to its feet. When the applause faded, she leaned into the microphone. "For years, I chose to live in the background," she said. "I chose love over legacy, silence over spotlight. But when someone tries to silence you, when they try to erase your worth, that's when you remember who you are." She paused. "I'm Isabel Monroe. I'm not just someone's ex-wife. I'm the next CEO of Monroe Global Media." The room erupted. That night, as she sat alone in her condo, watching the city lights flicker beneath her, Isabel placed both hands on her belly and whispered, "We're not surviving anymore. We're leading." She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that gala weeks earlier. That woman had been carrying a secret. Now, she carried power, and the world was finally watching her. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Isabel didn't wake up one morning glowing with power or confidence. It happened slowly, like winter thawing into spring. First in her posture, then her voice, then, most unmistakably, in her presence. 2 weeks after the press revealed her identity, Isabel walked into Monroe Global's headquarters for the first time in over a decade. The building was a towering steel and glass monolith in Midtown, but she walked through its revolving doors like it was her second home. The receptionist stood up as she approached, not out of obligation, but awe. "Welcome back, Miss Monroe." She nodded with a small smile, eyes clear. "It's good to be back." Gone were the soft silhouettes and pastels she once favored. Isabel now dressed in sharp lines and bold tones, rich navy, power white, emerald green. Her tailored suits hugged her curves and announced her arrival before she even spoke. Her heels clicked with intention. Her hair, once kept in soft waves, now framed her face in a sleek, commanding style. She wasn't dressing to please. She was dressing to dominate. In meetings, she no longer sat quietly in corners. She led. She challenged. She asked questions that no one else dared to. Senior executives who once dismissed her as the wife of that tech guy now scrambled to prepare for her sharp, unforgiving intellect. She spoke little, but when she did, everyone listened, and the world noticed. Articles flooded in again. The rise of Isabel Monroe, from betrayed wife to industry titan. She's not just back, she's ahead. Even fashion magazines took note. Isabel Monroe is redefining power dressing. One caption read beneath a photo of her stepping out of a black car in a caramel trench coat and sunglasses, the face of elegance and vengeance. But Isabel wasn't interested in fashion or fame. She was building. Every move she made now was deliberate, strategic. She began acquiring silent stakes in several AI startups, companies Adrian's empire relied on but never thought to monitor. She didn't make noise. She didn't gloat. She simply placed her chess pieces. And every day, her confidence grew stronger. Part of it came from clarity, from finally seeing her life and her worth without the filter of Adrian's shadow. But another part came from the people she now surrounded herself with. Margot, her sister, had become her closest advisor. Where Isabel was measured and precise, Margot was bold and fearless. The two made a formidable team, brains and fire. They took meetings together, worked late nights, and built a strategy that no man could predict. Her legal team, once only tasked with divorce proceedings, now operated as a full-on corporate shield, protecting her assets, negotiating contracts, expanding her influence. She also began seeing a therapist, quietly. Not because she was broken, but because she wanted to understand her own story fully, to make peace with the betrayal, to write the next chapter without resentment clouding her vision. But the most powerful change? Her mindset. Isabel no longer saw herself as a woman who had been left. She saw herself as a woman who had chosen to walk away, and that difference changed everything. At a private investor summit in Aspen, she was invited to speak on a panel about ethical leadership in tech. The audience was packed with CEOs, hedge fund managers, and journalists. Adrian Blake sat in the front row. It was the first time they had been in the same room since the gala. He looked different, tired, thinner, his aura dimmed. The man who once dismissed her had been forced to watch her rise higher than he ever imagined. When Isabel stepped on stage, the applause was thunderous. She wore a black silk blouse tucked into a high-waisted ivory skirt, minimal jewelry, and that signature confidence she had grown into like armor. The moderator turned to her. "Miss Monroe, given your unique perspective, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned from the past year?" Isabel didn't flinch. "That no one can take your power without your permission," she said. "I used to think that silence made me strong, that sacrificing myself for the people I loved was noble. But silence is not strength, it's survival, and I'm done surviving." There was a pause, then a standing ovation. Adrian didn't stand, but he didn't look away either. After the panel, he approached her quietly. "You've changed," he said, his voice low. "No," she replied. "I just stopped shrinking." He opened his mouth, as if to say more. Apologize, maybe. Defend himself. But Isabel was already turning to leave. "I wish you peace, Adrian," she said over her shoulder. "But you don't belong in my future." She didn't look back, because her eyes were set on something far greater. Her transformation wasn't just about image. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about ownership of her past, of her pain, of her power. And now she was unstoppable. It was the most anticipated tech event of the year, the Zenith Innovation Summit. Held annually in Silicon Valley, it was where billion-dollar ideas were born and legends were made. Everyone who mattered in the tech world was there. CEOs, venture capitalists, media moguls, and government officials. It was also the first time in a decade that Monroe Global and Blake Future Tech would share a stage. But only one name was on every guest's lips: Isabel Monroe. Rumors had swirled for weeks about her quiet acquisitions, her growing influence, her speech scheduled to open the summit. Still, no one expected what she had planned. Not even Adrian Blake. He had tried to reclaim his narrative after the gala scandal, hired a crisis PR firm, held carefully choreographed interviews, smiled for glossy magazine covers. But his stock had dropped, figuratively and literally. Clients were nervous, investors were cold. And worse, Isabel had become the symbol of everything he wasn't: poised, honest, and powerful. Adrian had received an invitation to the summit, of course, but this year, he was no longer opening keynote. That honor had been given to Isabel. The organizers claimed it was by popular demand. He told himself he didn't care. He was lying. The day of the summit, the auditorium was buzzing. Cameras were everywhere. Live streams were rolling. Isabel stepped onto the stage in a midnight blue tailored suit that shimmered subtly under the lights. Her heels clicked like punctuation as she crossed the stage, nodding to the standing ovation that erupted before she even spoke. Behind her, the screen lit up with one bold title: "When Empires Forget Who Built Them." She smiled softly, then began. "I'm here today, not just as a leader," she said, "but as someone who has watched empires rise and witnessed what happens when those in power forget the people who stood by them when there was nothing." The audience hushed. "This industry thrives on disruption," she continued. "But sometimes disruption isn't a new product or platform. Sometimes it's the courage to walk away, to speak out, to rebuild." Her words struck chords. Investors nodded, journalists typed furiously, cameras zoomed in. "But I'm not just here to talk," she said. "I'm here to announce a partnership that will change everything." The screen shifted. A new logo appeared, an elegant fusion of Monroe Global and another powerful AI firm. Gasps echoed across the room. The firm in question? One of Blake FutureTech's largest former partners. Isabel had acquired it in full. Silently, legally, brilliantly. And now she was announcing a direct competitor to Adrian's core platform. Sleeker, smarter, ethically driven. It would launch in 6 weeks. Already backed by major institutions. Already chosen by Fortune 500 companies. Adrian, seated near the middle of the auditorium, turned pale. It was a death blow wrapped in grace. But Isabel wasn't finished. She turned to the screen again. "Before I close," she said, "I think it's time we all take accountability. Not just in business, but in how we treat the people who believe in us." The screen played again. This time it wasn't a corporate video. It was security footage from a boardroom meeting, months old. Adrian's voice was unmistakable, laughing, belittling Isabel, calling her dead weight, bragging about how she'd never see it coming. The audience froze. Isabel let the silence linger. Then she looked directly into the camera. "To the women watching this," she said, "to the people who've been underestimated, gaslit, or quietly erased, this is for you. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And your silence is not required." Thunderous applause. The standing ovation lasted a full minute. Adrian sat, unmoving. He had just been publicly dismantled, not with rage or chaos, but with elegance, strategy, and truth. After the summit, Isabel didn't linger. She exited backstage, surrounded by her team, slipping into a waiting black SUV. The moment the doors shut, she exhaled slowly, looking out at the flashing cameras. "Everything went according to plan," her advisor said. Isabel nodded. "Better than I imagined." Her phone buzzed. A message from her attorney. "Final asset transfer confirmed. You now hold majority voting rights over the Blake FutureTech Advisory Board." She smiled, not out of vengeance, but victory. Weeks later, Adrian was forced to step down as CEO of his own company. Shareholders had lost confidence. The board moved unanimously. Public trust was gone. Isabel didn't replace him directly. She installed someone else. Young, diverse, visionary. Someone who actually cared about innovation and ethics. She had made her point, not by destroying Adrian's company, but by proving that she didn't need to become him to beat him. She built something better, more stable, more respected. That night, Isabel hosted a private gala of her own. It was intimate, tasteful, only the most loyal supporters and collaborators invited. She stood in the center of the room, champagne in hand, her baby bump now prominent beneath a soft silk gown. A guest approached her, a woman from a leading publication. "You've changed the landscape in less than 6 months," she said. "What's next?" Isabel didn't hesitate. "I raised this baby," she said, "and I raised the bar." Across the room, Margot raised her glass with a proud smile. They had done it. Together. And Adrian? He would never get the chance to rewrite the story, because Isabel Monroe had already published it, and the world had devoured every word. The morning of her baby shower was calm, peaceful, almost surreal. The kind of quiet that came after a storm, not before it. Isabel stood on the balcony of her new estate in the Hudson Valley, watching the sunlight ripple across the lake below. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and for the first time in months, she felt still. The past year had reshaped her life in ways she never could have predicted. Betrayal, collapse, resurrection, power. Each phase had peeled away a layer, revealing not someone new, but someone who had been there all along, waiting to be claimed. Her story had gone viral months ago. Millions watched the video of her at the Zenith Summit. Memes, tweets, and think pieces flooded the internet. Some called her a feminist icon. Others labeled her the quiet storm of the business world. But none of the noise mattered as much as the messages from women she'd never met. Single mothers, teachers, CEOs, survivors. You gave me strength. You reminded me who I am. I left him after watching your story. These messages meant more than stock prices or headlines. They were the real legacy. Not revenge, not fame, but impact. Inside the estate, her guests began to arrive. Family, close friends, women she trusted. No paparazzi, no reporters, just the people who had stood by her when everything crumbled. Margot arranged flowers in the foyer, her energy as vibrant as ever. You know, she teased, most people don't wear couture to their own baby shower. Isabel smiled, gently smoothing the pale lavender silk of her gown. Let them talk. They will, Margot replied, walking over to adjust her necklace. But this time they'll say, she made it look easy. They shared a laugh, one of those full-body healing laughs that only sisters can share after surviving hell together. As the celebration unfolded, Isabel made time to speak with every guest. She accepted their well wishes with gratitude, their compliments with grace. But when she stood to give a short toast, the entire room fell silent. I've been called a lot of things this year, she began. A wife, a victim, a millionaire, a CEO, but none of those labels mean as much as the one I'm about to receive, mother. Her voice didn't crack. It was strong, clear, earned. I wanted to say something for the women who are here today and the ones watching from afar. You are not weak because you gave too much. You are not broken because you stayed too long. And you are not foolish for believing in love. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. What makes you powerful is what you choose to do after. After the betrayal, after the silence, after the shame, we are not defined by the people who leave us. We are defined by how we rise. Applause swelled through the room, genuine and teary-eyed. You don't need to be rich to be powerful, she added. You just need to remember who you are before the world told you to forget. Later that evening, as the guests departed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Isabel sat alone in the nursery. It was warm and soft, painted in muted tones of sage and cream. A room not of extravagance, but of peace. She ran her hand along the edge of the crib and whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if you're enough. I'll remind you every day." The baby kicked gently in response. She smiled. Not everything had healed. The scars remained. Some nights she still woke up with fragments of memories she wished she could erase. But healing, she had learned, was not about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming it, turning the most painful moments into stepping stones, transforming silence into legacy. That legacy was now being formalized into something more. She had launched the Monroe Foundation, dedicated to supporting women leaving abusive or toxic relationships. Legal aid, housing support, career training. It was her way of ensuring no woman ever had to choose between her dignity and her survival. And she wasn't alone. The board was made up entirely of women she had mentored, former assistants, businesswomen, teachers, single mothers. Each one a story of comeback. Each one a force of her own. In the months to come, Isabel would return to the boardroom, not out of necessity, but passion. She would raise her child with grace and strength. And when the time was right, she'd tell them the story, not of how she was betrayed, but of how she rose. How she refused to be silenced. How she turned her pain into purpose. She would tell them that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks away. Sometimes it stays silent. Sometimes it writes checks, holds babies, signs deals, or holds its own hand when no one else will. Isabel Monroe was no longer the woman who begged to be seen. She was the woman who made herself impossible to ignore, the woman who taught the world that dignity can be louder than rage, that silence can be strategy, that elegance is a weapon. As the stars began to bloom across the sky, she leaned back in the rocking chair, resting both hands on her belly. "You're coming into a world that tried to break your mother," she whispered, "but I didn't break. I built." And that was the real ending. Not with vengeance, but with victory. Not with drama, but with legacy. Because in the end, Isabel had proven something every woman needed to hear. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to know your worth and never let anyone take it from you again.